The first thing I remember was the sound upon the reef, like a man breathing in pain beneath the stones. The night air lay heavy and hot, yet my skin rose in chill. Our fire burned straight, though no wind moved. Beyond its light, in the dark fringe of palms, something tall watched us with the stillness of carved wood, and the sand about its feet did not show a single print. Men have asked me many times to set this down, that others might judge whether age has turned my memories to fancies. If these words hold you, then give them your notice, pass them onward, and speak your thoughts below, so the tale need not die with us. It began 3 weeks earlier. On the 15th day of the month, the Tahiti men counted for the strength of the trade wind, in the year that I later learned the white priests would call 1306. I was young then, scarcely scarred by spear or storm, and proud to serve as steersman under Tautai Rangi on our double canoe Timanava. We had come westward from Rarotonga, following the old star paths toward the scattered isles that lie like fallen breadfruit seeds across that quarter of the ocean. The elders had spoken of the Cook Islands, though they named them differently then, each island with its own face and temper. My duty lay with the steering oar and the watching of Hanayakamalama, the guiding stars. Our hulls were lashed tight with sennet, the sail of woven pandanus heavy with salt. We carried stone adzes, spears tipped with barbed bone, gourds of water, baskets of dried fish, and a few pigs that complained whenever the sea grew rough. The air that season was gentle, the swell long and even, the sky mostly clear save for the high, thin clouds that meant no harm. We had 20 men aboard Te Manava and 8 women who came to seek new land, each with her own story. Of these people, 3 matter most to this telling. There was Tautai Rangi, our captain, a broad man with streaks of white already in his hair, who spoke seldom but whose word was law. There was Nuku, lean and restless, whose laughter came easily and whose courage did not always wait for his wits. And there was Maero, a woman of Atiu with eyes like dark glass, whose dreams, some said, ran ahead of the canoe. On the second night after the first sighting of Mangaya's low shadow, the wind died near midnight. Our sail fell slack. The great ocean around us became a mirror, the hulls creaking softly in their own reflection. I shared a twist of dried pandanus leaf with Nuku at the stern, while Rangi lay wrapped in his cloak near the mast. Nuku spoke of his small son in Rarotonga, who liked to grip his father's fingers as though he could anchor him to the island by force. I told him of my mother's house near the stream and her way of singing when she pounded breadfruit. The air was warm, our tobacco leaf harsh and comforting upon the tongue. There was nothing then to mark the moment as strange. Yet even that first night, there came a sound that did not belong to sea or sky. It came on the starboard side, faint but clear, a soft knocking, as of wood upon stone, too regular for wave slap, too deliberate for accident. 3 taps, then silence. 3 more, some breaths later. It seemed to move along beside us. I leaned out, peering into the black water. Yes, I saw only our own dim reflection, the rounded steeds of moonlight on small ripples. When I turned, I found Maero already watching from the bow, arms wrapped about herself though the night was hot. She said nothing. Her gaze did not leave the dark. In the morning I spoke of the knocking to Tautai Rangi. He frowned, then nodded toward the pigs trussed near the forelashings. Some animal, he said. They hear their own bones complain. Your ears are tired from the wind. It was a good answer. I held to it. Yet when the sound returned the next night, and the next, tracking us like a follower just beyond the circle of our hulls, my certainty began to thin. The first sign upon land came when we made the atoll that men now call Manue. We anchored within the reef at dawn, the lagoon clear as polished stone. Fish flashed in the shallows, and birds wheeled above in such number that their cries seemed to lift the sky. There should have been comfort in such life, yet something in the pattern of it sat wrong. As we drew the canoe toward the beach, the birds rose from the palms inland, not in scattered bursts, but all at once, as if one command had reached them. They flew toward the sea and kept their distance from the shore, circling high and thin-voiced, never settling. The pigs on our deck lay still, ears flat, eyes rolling, refusing to set foot upon the sand until we dragged them. Nuku laughed and called them cowards. He leaped from the prow and splashed ashore, lifting his spear in mock challenge to the silent trees. His voice rang bold, yet the echo that came back from the forest sounded strangely muffled, as if the trees had swallowed it. Rangi ordered a small party inland for fresh water and wood. I went with Nuku, Maero, and 3 others. We carried adzes, spears, and plaited baskets, our bare feet sinking into the fine white sand that looked untouched by recent tide or track. No crab marks, no lizard trails, only the wind's small writings. Halfway between shore and the first line of trees, I stooped to adjust the cord of my gourd. When I looked up, Maria had stopped ahead of us, her face turned toward the deeper forest, though there was nothing to see. Her nostrils flared slightly, as if she tasted something on the air. "Do you smell that?" she asked. I inhaled. At first, I noticed only the salted heat, the sweetness of flowering pandanus. Then, on the edge of it, a faint musk, like an animal that had lain long in one place. Neither fresh nor rotten, it came and went with the smallest stirring of air. "Pig scent," Nuku said. "There are wild ones here. Good hunting. It might have been so." We pressed on. The forest took us in with a shade that brought relief from the sun. Trunks rose twisted and close, draped with lianas ferns brushed our calves. Underfoot, the earth felt cool and slightly damp, giving softly as if laid over something hollow. We heard no insects, no crackle of lizard feet through the leaf mold. The call of the seabirds faded until there was nothing but the sound of our own footfalls and the rasp of our breath. That was the first true silence, the kind that seems to look back at the listener. By a low stream not far from the inner lagoon, we found marks that should have been those of some large animal. At a glance, they seemed like the prints of a pig, yet longer, with toes that pressed deeper at the tips. The span between fore and hind marks told of a creature taller than any boar I had seen, perhaps as high at the shoulder as a man's chest. Nuku grinned, eyes bright with the thrill of a great hunt. He laid his hand beside one track and whistled softly. "We shall feast," he said. "Rangi will praise us, and your mother will have a fine tusk for her doorway." Maria did not smile. She crouched near another print that lay partly upon a stone. The weight had chipped the rock edge, leaving a fresh, pale scar. She touched it with her fingers, then wiped them on her cloth as if the stone had sweated something uneasy. "There is no drag between the steps," she murmured. "No tail. It moves like a man." I told myself then that the creature must simply be very careful with its feet. There are pigs that run light upon their hooves. We filled our gourds, cut some wood, and returned to the canoe. Behind us, as we stepped from the forest's edge into sunlight, I felt at my back the sensation that one feels when a stranger watches in silence, weighing one's worth. The days that followed took us to Mauke, then toward Rarotonga again, tracing a wide circle that had been sailed by many before us. Yet, at each landfall, always in the inland shadows, we found signs that seemed to belong to the same unseen walker. On Mauke, a line of pandanus trunks bore deep, parallel scores at a height beyond any man's reach, as if some hand with stone-hard nails had tested its strength upon them. The shavings of bark beneath were fresh, not yet browned by air. On another shore, a fishing net we had left to soak overnight came back to us torn, and not by teeth or rough coral, but by long, clean rips that ran in arcs, as if made thoughtfully. Our nights at anchor grew less restful. The knocking upon the hulls, which had begun as a thing one might laugh away, grew more intricate. There came patterns to it, a spacing like the beat of a chant, differing each time as if searching for response. Once, near the quarter when the moon was a narrow hook, the knocking rose to a scraping slide that travelled the full length of our starboard hull, slow and deliberate, as though some broad palm tested the joinery. Around the 40th day of that voyage, the sea lay calm as a sleeping child. The sky wore a thin veil of high cloud, and the heat upon the deck was such that the men lay in the shade of the sail, murmuring like bees. And I had just checked the lashings at the stern when the water beside us blossomed with a ring of small bubbles, as if a great fish had sighed beneath. Nuku leaned over, grinning, to peer into that patch of stirred water. At that moment, the steering oar in my hands jerked. The heavy blade, which was sunk deep to hold our course, wrenched sideways with a force that strained the rope at my wrist. For an instant, the whole canoe shuddered. The lashings creaked, and one of the forward poles let out a sharp cracking sound. I shouted and pulled, planting my feet, expecting to see the dark shape of some shark or whale roll to the surface. Instead, the water cleared at once, smooth as polished obsidian. Whatever had seized the blade had left no mark, no whirl, no flash of fin. The pigs squealed in chorus, then fell silent, and their bodies pressing hard against the inner rail as if seeking the center of the hull. Rangi came aft, his jaw tight. He examined the oar, the rope, my hands, which had reddened where the cord had bitten. There was no break, no chip in the wood. Some passing current, he said at last, but there was no belief in his tone. We keep on. That night there was no knocking. Instead, there came a long absence of any sound at all. The small laps of wave against hull, the creak of rope, even the faint rush of breath from sleeping men seemed held back. We sat in our own stillness, as if sealed inside a shell. When sound returned, it did so in an altered form. From out beyond the visible water, somewhere between our canoe and the edge of starlight, came a voice that imitated our own speech, yet never quite became words. It rose and fell with the cadence of talk, with pauses where answers should fit, using tones I recognized from Rangis' commands, from Nuku's jokes, even from the soft phrases Maero used in prayer. I could not make sense of it. No syllables settled into meaning. It was as if a man born without a tongue sought to speak after hearing us for many nights, learning shape without substance. I felt the hair rise upon my arms. Around me, I knew the others felt it also, though none spoke while the voice murmured on. Later, under the sour breath of dawn, Maria said quietly, It listens, and now it wishes to be invited. I asked her, more sharply than I intended, what she believed it to be. She looked out toward where the sun would rise, her gaze on that thin, bright line. "Among my people," she said, "they speak of those who never took to the canoes, who stayed behind when our ancestors set out. The land held them, the deep forests fed them. They grew different. Some say they are guardians, some say they are hunger given shape. The name matters little if the tracks are the same." I argued that tales change on each island, that fear loves to borrow forms. "The thing that touched our hull," I said, "might be some sea creature unknown, or a trick of current and tired minds." Yet, even as I spoke, the memory of that imitation of Rangis' rough call turned the words thin in my own ears. We made the southern coast of Rarotonga under a sky stained crimson by the setting sun. Smoke from cooking fires along the shore braided upward, a welcome sight after weeks of unease. Yet as we approached, people stood strangely silent upon the beach, and watching our sail with attention I had not seen on other returns. Only when our hulls grated upon the sand and the women began to sing the homecoming chant did I notice the absence that lay behind all this. No dog barked, no child ran too near and was scolded back. The usual living noise of the village seemed pressed flat. An old man named Tere, who bore intricate tattoos up to his throat, came forward to greet Rangi. His eyes were not on our captain's face, but on the hulls behind him, as if counting. "You followed the western path too far," he said. "Your shadow company grows large." Rangi asked him what he meant. Tere gestured toward the forested slopes behind the village, where cloud clung low among the trees. "The men of old, who first came from Avaiki, spoke of a bitter one who walks among those islands," he said, using a term I had heard only in half-whispered tales. Maero, they named it. Not beast, not man. Long limbs, triple nails, hair like the mats of the dead washed ashore. It takes pigs first, then dogs, then men. It likes those who move between islands, for their names do not root in any one soil. You will leave food and words for it, or it will follow the path of your children. The others murmured uneasily. Nuku scoffed in low tones, yet he did so while rubbing the cord of his armlet, a small habit he had when troubled. We followed the old forms, though many of us did not believe. That night, we laid a portion of our dried fish and some kava root at the edge of the forest, near a great banyan whose aerial roots formed a twisted wall. Rangi spoke formal words of respect to whatever unseen powers might listen. His voice steady, but his hands clasped tighter than I had seen in rough seas. The village dogs, usually greedy, would not approach the offering. They lingered behind us, ears flat, whining softly. One small black dog, braver than the rest, crept forward a few paces, tail low. Its nose twitched furiously. Suddenly, it yelped as if struck and bolted back, nearly tripping a child in its panic. There had been no movement near the banyan, no thrown stone, no hiss, nothing that my eye could judge, yet the dog ran until it vanished between the houses. We slept on shore that night, toward the deepest portion of darkness, when even the embers of the cooking fires had guttered low. I woke with the unshakable sense that I was not alone. The wind had died. The usual chorus of frogs and night birds was absent. The air pressed hot and thick against my face. Then, from somewhere beyond the houses, in the direction of the beach, came a slow, dragging footstep. not the light, quick pads of a man, nor the four-beat rhythm of a pig, but a heavy, deliberate stride, followed by a faint scraping, as if some part of the walker trailed along the ground or against the walls. It moved past our sleeping place without pause, heading toward the forest. Others heard it. I knew this from the way breath caught around me, from the small rustle of someone's hand reaching for a spear that did not dare to be lifted. No one called out. No one wished to draw that step back upon us. In the pale morning light, the villagers found tracks at the edge of the trees. I went with them. The prints there matched the ones we had seen upon the atoll, long, deeply pressed, as with a spread of toes that bit into the soil. Here, though, a few of them overlapped older human footprints. The direction of the depressions made it clear. The thing had stepped precisely where a woman and her child had walked the previous evening, matching their path with unsettling care, heel to heel, as if measuring their gait. The village elders made offerings for 3 days. Smoke from their fires drifted into the forest, carrying chants that spoke of peace, of distance, of separate paths. The dogs refused to go beyond the outermost gardens. The pigs in our pens grew gaunt, eating only at midday when the sun blazed strongest. We might have written all this off as the island's own affair, a matter for its priests and guardians, had it not been for what followed on our departure. Tautai Rangi chose to leave quickly, before fear or custom could root us to the place. Our canoe pushed off at dawn of the 4th day. The sea received us with a low swell and a wind that favored our southward tilt. The villagers watched from shore. Among them stood Maria, who had decided to remain on Rarotonga, saying her dreams were too full of broken voyages. "Do not look back at night," she said to me as I embraced her in farewell. "Whatever you hear beside the hull, keep your eyes upon the stars." That seemed a strange caution, but I agreed. One does not argue with a woman whose gaze moves as hers did, half in this world and half beyond some thin dividing line. We made good distance that day. The sky stayed clear, the trade wind steady. Spirits lifted. Nuku led a chant, and some men spoke of women they would take when next they made land. It almost seemed the shadow that had clung to us would be left behind like a patch of stormy water. Yet at sunset, as the sky bled into the sea, a bank of fog appeared to windward. I had seen sea fogs before, rolling low and soft, tasting of chill. This one rose in upright columns, like smoke around invisible pillars, and moved against the wind. Its outer edge halted a bowshot from our hulls, then held there, keeping pace as the day's last light faded. The air grew suddenly cold along that side of the canoe. A thin line marked where the chill met the normal warmth, like the boundary between two currents. When I put my hand through it, the hairs upon my wrist stiffened. Breath became visible in small, pale clouds. Within the fog, something moved. I did not see form or limb. I saw only the subtle shifting of density, and like muscles sliding under skin, the suggestion of a tall shape that paced our course. From that grey wall came the faintest smell of earth turned long ago, and of a musk that set the back of my throat to tightening. Night gathered. The fog persisted. The wind held, but no sound of wave or rope came from that side, as if the moisture swallowed it. Maria's parting words turned in my mind, and I kept my eyes resolutely on the familiar stars. Others were less disciplined. Nuku peered often into the murk, muttering that he saw nothing but water ghosts of his own imagination. Yet his humor had frayed. when the pigs began to squeal again, not in the shrill pitch of hunger, but in deep, choking bursts, even he fell silent. Near midnight, from within that veiling grey, there came a sound I shall carry to my own burning place. It was the noise of great nails or claws slowly drawing down the length of a woven hull, not tearing, only testing, creating a prolonged rasp that set every fibre of the canoe to trembling. At the same time, something heavy brushed the outer side, so that the hull tipped minutely like a man shifting his weight in sleep. Men gripped spears, but no one struck. What would we have struck at? The unseen? The fog's skin? Rangus' face shone with sweat, though the air was cold on that side. He whispered old names under his breath, names of navigators and spirits alike, as if either might hear. The rasping ceased. There followed a pause long enough for hope to rise. Then from very near the rail behind me, at the level of a man's head, came a soft, wet inhalation, as of a great lung drawing us in. I felt the warmth of it upon my neck. A stench of old leaves matted with animal sweat filled my nose. My hands clenched upon the steering oar until my knuckles blanched. I did not turn. I fixed my gaze upon the star that marked our southern course and recited inwardly the names of my ancestors. The breath came again, then shifted away along the hull, moving slowly as if the unseen visitor paced, considering. At the bow, where our smallest boy, Tani, lay wrapped in a spare cloth, a faint whimper sounded. His mother reached for him. Before her hand found his shoulder, there was a soft thump, like the settling of a heavy weight very near. Her fingers closed upon empty cloth. She screamed then, a raw, short sound that was cut off, as if a hand had clamped across her mouth. Men surged forward, but all we could see through the fog was the barely outlined form of the boy's blanket, indented for a heartbeat by something long and narrow pressing from above, 3 deep grooves like the marks we had seen upon tree and soil. Then the cloth sprang back, empty, fluttering in the cold air. The scream that rose next came from the men, from our own chests, unwilling yet unstoppable. Rangi barked for silence, his voice cracking. The fog thinned in that instant with the suddenness of lifted cloth, swept aside by some whim or boredom. The warm air of the open ocean rushed in. Stars shone clear. The boy was gone. We searched the hulls, the water around us, even the sky that had become our enemy. There was nothing, no splash, no small body drifting. A pig's rope lay frayed at one end. One of the spears, lashed along the rail, bore 3 shallow grooves near its base, evenly spaced, as though gripped by some hard, many-jointed hand. Dawn found us hollow-eyed and disbelieving. We wrapped Tanis' empty cloth about a stone and sank it with a chant, the words catching on tears and salt. Some men muttered that no one should speak the name that old Terry had used, lest it tie the thing closer. Others whispered that it had claimed its share and might now lose interest. The journey homeward after that became a thing of quiet dread. Laughter had no place upon our deck. Men moved softly, as if in a hut of mourning. The pigs refused to eat, and their eyes filmed over, though no disease we knew took them. They died, one by one, always at night, without struggle, their ropes unbroken. Yet there were no more fogs, no more voices that tried to speak like us. The knocking upon the hull ceased entirely. The sea seemed almost too kind, as if the ocean itself, usually indifferent, had chosen to speed us away from some presence it would not house. We made landfall at last upon our home beach, under a sky as bland and bright as if no other world pressed close. The villagers greeted us with joy that faltered as they counted the faces upon our deck and found one missing. Tanis' mother stepped ashore with an empty gaze, her arms hanging slack. Rangi told the formal tale of a sudden wave that had washed the boy overboard in darkness, of our failure to find him. I stood by and said nothing. Who would have believed otherwise? What mark could I point to? What sign upon wood or skin that would prove some long-remembered shape had reached across from forest to sea to claim a child? The spears, with their faint grooves, had already been smoothed by anxious fingers. The frayed pig rope could be any rope that had seen salt and strain. The priests took Rangi's report and wrote it into their memories. A child lost to Tangaroa, they said. The sea god takes as the sea gives. Offerings were made, chants were sung. The village life moved slowly back into its usual patterns, though for some months afterward, no one slept easily when the mist came rolling low over the hills. In the years that followed, other voyages set out. Some returned with all accounted for, bringing only stories of storms and rich fishing grounds. A few came back lean-eyed, with fresh scars upon the hulls and a new respect for the old tales. One canoe from a neighboring island vanished entirely along the western path, leaving only a fragment of woven sail that washed ashore one season, bearing upon it 3 long, parallel tiers that had started and stopped with uncanny precision. I grew older, my hands thickened with rope callus. I took command of Te Manava when Rangi's eyes began to fail. I sailed those same routes, some of them many times, always watching the line where water meets sky, always listening for that irregular knocking that had once seemed foolish and had later become a dread. It did not recur for me, not in that same way. Yet other signs gathered, small and scattered like shells along different beaches that share the same spiral. In lands far north, men spoke of forest spirits with long fingers who braided women's hair as they slept. In the deep valleys of other islands, hunters told of tracks that walked beside their own and then vanished where there was nowhere for a living creature to step. The word Maero, or something like it, arose from old mouths in many dialects. Once, many years after that voyage, I met Nuku by chance upon a different shore. Age had thinned him. A jagged white ridge crossed his forearm, and his hair bore more grey than black. We shared dried kava and chewed tobacco in the lee of a beached canoe while the evening came in. He had not sailed much since that season, he said. Night crossings troubled his sleep. Often, he woke with the sensation of warm breath upon his neck, and the certain knowledge that if he opened his eyes too quickly, he would see something leaning close, studying his face with patient curiosity. He told me he kept a small torch burning in his hut, not for light, but to remind himself that there were still things the shadow had not swallowed. We spoke too of Tani, whose name had largely faded from the songs of the younger men. And only his mother kept his memory alive, laying out small offerings at the forest edge on certain nights, and listening, head tilted, for footsteps that did not belong to any neighbor. Once, she swore she heard her son's voice behind a cluster of ferns, speaking her name in a tone both familiar and wrong. She did not go to him. Wisdom can be born from terror. I tried, in my own way, to place our experience within some frame that the mind could hold. I considered the currents, the strange ways of sound upon the sea. the habits of unknown beasts that might roam those far forests and sometimes wander into the shallows. I learned from foreigners who brought iron and new gods, and from their charts and instruments, I gained other ways of seeing distance and depth. None of it quite settled upon that single night when the fog moved against the wind and a boy vanished without a splash. Twice I attempted to speak more plainly of it to those who wrote down tales. Both times they smiled kindly and suggested that age had embroidered my memories, that perhaps the child had been taken by a shark while we slept, that the mind, seeking meaning in a random grief, had arranged sounds and fog into the shape of an old superstition. They were not cruel. They simply had never felt breath upon their neck that carried the smell of buried leaves. So I gave them the simpler story. The sea took him, I said. The sea took the pigs that died without wound. The sea laid those long gouges upon the tree trunks. The sea followed our hull with patient knocking. It was easier for them and for me in those moments. In private, in the long watches of later voyages, the other version remained. It lived in the subtle ways my hands moved, in the offerings I laid at certain landfalls, though no one bade me. When I felt the hull shift in an ordinary swell, a part of me waited for the deliberate counterpressure of some unseen palm. When fog rolled, even when I knew by star and sound that it was only air and water, my gaze went to the boundary where cold met warm, expecting any moment to see that faint distortion of something tall pacing alongside. There are nights now, in my old age, when a simple household sound unsettles me in ways I would rather not confess. A loose board in the floor that flexes just so. The creak of a roof pole under wind that arranges itself into 3 slow knocks. I tell myself tales of settling wood and changing temperature, and I almost believe them, until the space between those knocks falls into that old rhythm, the one I first heard upon the still, dark sea. Once, during a season of heavy rain, I woke in my hut to a choking smell of wet earth and old hair, strong enough to make my eyes water. No wind moved. The doormat lay flat. From the rafters above my sleeping place came a careful scraping, not of rat or lizard, but of something heavier, crossing the thatch with exaggerated delicacy. It passed directly over my chest, paused, then continued toward the far end of the house, where my grandchildren lay in a tangle of limbs. My heart seized in my chest. For one terrible moment, I tasted the cold of that boundary fog again. Then, gradually, the scent weakened. The scraping grew fainter. Somewhere beyond the wall, among the breadfruit trees, a dog began to bark, a ragged, furious sound that ended in a yelp and silence. In the morning, the children woke unharmed, complaining only of strange dreams of tall shadows that forgot to have faces. On another occasion, visiting a northern island whose people I barely knew, I watched a group of boys playing near the forest edge. One boy suddenly froze, staring at the ground. I went closer and saw that his bare foot lay neatly inside a print already there, longer than his, deeper, the alignment precise as if the earth remembered an older step and had chosen to swallow both together. The boy pulled his foot back with a cry and refused to go near that patch of ground again. Sometimes I ask myself what it was that first called such a thing to notice us. Was it the pattern of our hulls across waters it considered its own? Was it some forgotten slight by our ancestors when they hewed paths through its forests? Or was it merely curiosity, the same impulse that leads a child to tap upon a crab's shell to see what lies within? The answer, I think, lies beyond any measure that our small chants and carved poles can reach. In the end, what remains to me is less a story of a monster than of a presence that does not fit cleanly into man's neat circles of understanding. Something that listens, learns the shape of our voices, tests the strength of our wood, tracks our steps with a patience that stretches across more seasons than any one life. Whether one names it Maero or some other word born from a particular shore, changes nothing of the weight of its hand. I sit now by the same strand where Timanava once launched, my grandchildren playing where Tani once ran. The forest beyond the village has grown back thick in places where it was once cleared. In the dusk, the line between tree and shadow blurs, and the air holds that brief, breathless pause before the night cries of insects begin. On such evenings when the tide is full and the hulls of the newer canoes rock gently in their moorings, I sometimes hear, beneath the ordinary clutter of sound, a faint, deliberate tapping upon the underside of a distant deck, measured and patient, as if something far below the water quietly counts those who still dare to cross its path.